Okay, great. All right.
Oh, that's a good idea. So you don't get that voice on the record when people are actually here. So,
Right. And then I think I'm going to let people in right at noon,
okay.
So that if there's any last minute business, we can discuss that. Like when you're ready, then I'll let everybody in.
Okay, I think we're set.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So far we have 2 people. Okay, so I'll go ahead and admit them. Okay.
Oh, Janet wants to know if there's a passcode for the flash talk. Is it still Kelsey?
Okay, we can probably start in just a few minutes. We'll maybe wait 1 more minute to let people still join. Okay, should we get started? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's Kelsey Museum Virtual Flash Talk. Today's presentation will last about 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A with you, our audience. Our speaker today is Terry Wilfong. Terry is our curator of Greco-Roman Egyptian collections here at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology and former director. He is also professor of Egyptology in the Department of Middle East Studies at the University of Michigan. Today, Terry will be discussing his research on the Egyptian artist Hamzeh Carr. In preparation for a future exhibition and publication of the Kelsey Museum's Hamzeh Carr paintings, Terry has been tracing the amazing career of this artist and will share some of his findings. Welcome, Terry, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to share my screen now, so hopefully that will work. Okay. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about a current project which is still very much in progress for me. It's also a project that's taken on a life of its own and has become something I wasn't expecting. I've gone from standard exhibition planning to reconstructing a life full of mysteries. Initially, my plans were very simple. The Kelsey Museum has in its archives 9 large-scale watercolor facsimile paintings of murals found by the University of Michigan Kuranis excavation in the 1920s. This was a common practice before color photography was reliable or affordable. It was a way of recording color in ancient objects found in the field. The Barroso watercolors in the Kelsey Museum are a good example of this. The Kuranis paintings are not on display and have never, as far as I know, been on display and are much less well known. These paintings were first shown to me in Kelsey Museum storage by the former registrar Robin Metter Woodruff all the way back in 1994, so I've known about them for a long time. A few years ago, I began thinking it was time to do an exhibition of these paintings. This is partly because the Kuranis paintings have received renewed interest in recent years. Art historians see them as an important stage, transitional stage in the development of Byzantine painting. Scholars like Tom Matthew, Vincent Rondeau, and Thelma Thomas, among others, have argued for the importance of these paintings and understanding how Byzantine art got to where it was. So my idea was to get these paintings in the Kelsey collection conserved and to do an exhibition exploring their subject matter, exploring the context in which they were found, and these practices of recording archaeological color through facsimiles. A few of the paintings are visibly signed Hamzeh Carr, and all of them are attributed to him. So my first question was, who was Hamzeh Carr? For the planned exhibition, my initial thought was, well, I need to do a little bit of research. I'll do some digging in the archives and I'll do some work online. It'll result maybe in a panel in the exhibition, maybe a paragraph or 2, or even a page in the publication. This was over 3 years ago. The question of who was Hamzeh Carr has become a huge part of the whole project, which has changed quite radically. So I'm talking to you today about what I've been finding and also the processes of finding it. There is very little about Hamzeh Carr in the Kelsey Museum's own archives. We have a major statement about his initial hiring by A.E.R. Boak, writing a report at the end of the first season at Kuranis, talking about why they hired Hamzeh Carr. He says, the only available person who seemed capable of doing such work, that is the painting of the facsimiles, was Mr. Hamzeh Carr, an Englishman who has spent many years in Egypt and who has done some good work of this type for the Cairo Museum. However, Mr. Carr had enjoyed a prosperous season as a court and society portrait painter and valued his services for the work at 70 Egyptian pounds and his keep at the camp. After consultation with some of the Antiquities Department staff, I offered him 50 pounds plus his keep. So Carr is described as an Englishman, a court and society portrait painter whose fee was higher than the Michigan team wanted to pay, but he was being hired because he'd done some good work of this type in the past. And indeed, if you search online for Hamzeh Carr, you can see a few examples of Carr's other archaeological work in Egypt. The earliest was a series of paintings and drawings done in 1921 from the tomb of Cyrus, a 4th century BCE elite tomb in northern Egypt, which was noted for its combination of Egyptian and Hellenistic artistic styles and its fine painted reliefs. Hamzeh Carr is more frequently associated with an archaeological find of the following year, the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered in 1922. Within weeks of the tomb's discovery, Hamzeh Carr was actually in the tomb at the invitation of its excavator, Howard Carter. The fact that Howard Carter trusted Hamzeh Carr to go into the tomb suggests strongly that there was a connection between the two, and also that Hamzeh Carr's artistic reputation was already considerable. It's likely that Hamzeh Carr only had a short time in the tomb, during which he made a number of quick sketches that were very unlike the meticulous work he did in the tomb of Cyrus. But these sketches were not intended for scholarly publication. Instead, they were to be the first images of the tomb's contents to be released to the world, and this is how they were published in an article in the Illustrated London News in January of 1923. Hamzeh Carr later republished his sketches in a booklet with bilingual Egyptian Arabic text. So it's in this Egyptological context that Hamzeh Carr was hired to work for Michigan in the spring of 1925. He had already done a number of Egyptological projects, he had connections, and he was available. 1925 was already an extraordinarily busy year for Hamzeh Carr. In addition to his own artistic practice, which included portraits and more scenic work, Hamzeh Carr had become a sought-after book illustrator, and two major book projects come from this time. If you search for Hamzeh Carr online, the great majority of results will be for one of two books that he illustrated in the 1920s, both for the London-based publisher John Lane, The Bodley Head. I've written about these in a recent Kelsey Museum newsletter, and I won't go into much detail here, but merely use them to set up more context for the Michigan work. In November 1924, John Lane published a lavish edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which was illustrated by Hamzeh Carr. Carr's illustrations draw on Persian miniature traditions, but Carr's work is starker and less ornate. It's more concerned with line and color. This book's success led to a new commission for Hamzeh Carr, this time an edition of Sir Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia, a book-length poem first published in 1879, retelling the life of the Buddha. John Lane's publication of The Light of Asia hoped to capitalize on the new popularity of Buddhism in the 1920s, mostly by way of theosophy, an esoteric movement founded in the US in the 19th century that drew on Western mystical traditions as well as Eastern religions, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. We'll come back to theosophy in a bit. These two books, as I say, make up the commonest results for any internet search for Hamzeh Carr, and they are certainly valuable resources for Carr and showcase his illustration art. They've also proven sources of frustration for me as a researcher in that if these are the only results that you're getting, we're not getting the whole story here. So researching Hamzeh Carr, one quickly comes up against a number of problems. Most notably, the name Hamzeh Carr is a pseudonym. This isn't his legal birth name, and so searching for hard factual information about this person poses challenge. His legal name is uncertain, although I will say I'm about 95% sure that I have tracked down a legal name, a birth date, and place. I'm waiting on some documents for confirmation, but it's still been a challenge. There are no obituaries. We don't know when he died. We don't have any legal documents connected to that. Circumstantial evidence suggests that he may have died without family, and certainly he didn't leave a will as far as we can establish. There are no traditional biographical sources for Hamzeh Carr as far as I can tell either. There are no papers or letters which may have been dispersed or lost at his death. So having to work around these challenges has forced me to look for alternative approaches. One useful category of source for me has been anecdotal accounts. Hamzeh Carr appears in a surprising number of brief stories and mentions in biographies and memoirs of other people, and has been helpful in building up a portrait of Hamzeh Carr. Another use is promotional material, specifically from his publisher John Lane, promoting these illustrated books. The company went all out in promoting these books, and Hamzeh Carr was part of this process. I'm going to share with you two promos for The Light of Asia that raise important points about Hamzeh Carr's life. One of these is the Round of the Day column in the Westminster Gazette for 17 September 1926. Westminster Gazette is a political newspaper of the time. It focuses on political news and gossip, but also has arts and culture features. Its Round of the Day column was a regular feature in which events and celebrities were highlighted. And so in the lead up to the publication of The Light of Asia, the column featured Hamzeh Carr. I'll give you some excerpts of this verbatim because to date, these are the only actual words that are attributed to Hamzeh Carr that I've been able to find. So it's a bit like he's speaking to us about himself. Of course, these words are probably as much those of the reporter as the interviewee. As you'll see, they're quite formal. So under the heading Turned Muslim, we read, I had an interesting conversation today with Mr. Hamzeh Carr, illustrator of the new edition of The Light of Asia. Mr. Carr is one of the few Englishmen who had become a Muslim. The principal reason for my becoming a Muslim, he told me, was a rebellion against prejudice. It seems to me such an impertinence that any one religion should presume to claim a copyright, as it were, in salvation. I am by no means an orthodox Muslim, for, as a theosophist, I now see that all religions must be one, though differing slightly in the presentation of the truth. So this brief statement gives us two major facts about Hamzeh Carr: his status as a Muslim convert and his identity as a theosophist. Both of these facts we see in other sources for Hamzeh Carr in the 1920s. Most mentions of him refer to his being a Muslim, and his connections to theosophy can be found in a number of sources. Contrary to what this article states, though, conversions to Islam in England, especially among artistic and literary circles, were not uncommon in the wake of World War I. Islam was at that time seen as a religion of peace and an alternative to the horrific bloodshed carried out by the largely Christian populations of Europe during World War I. Hamzeh Carr's involvement with theosophy comes from a similar place and mindset. Theosophy was popular in artistic and literary circles in the 20s as a school of thought unifying religious beliefs. Indeed, it was a frequent target of parody because of its popularity. We see this in the writings of authors such as Evelyn Waugh, E.F. Benson, and even T.S. Eliot. Hamzeh Carr was active in both the London and Cairo branches of the Theosophical Society. Our article takes us to another aspect of Hamzeh Carr's career. Mr. Carr, who spends his winters in Cairo and comes to England in the summer, designed all the sets for the recent production of The Green Hat, and also the tropical scene for the Somerset Maughams' The Moon and Sixpence. Now, it's very useful to have confirmation here of Hamzeh Carr's annual schedule, wintering in Egypt and summering in England. This is common among English expatriates who spent part of their year in Egypt. But the last bit may come as something of a surprise in the context of this serious little interview. However, Hamzeh Carr had his own projects to promote, and the interview came at an opportune time, as Hamzeh Carr was making ventures into theatrical design as well as his other artistic endeavors. Indeed, in the year 1925, in addition to his work at Kuranas, Hamzeh Carr was also designing sets for two high-profile London West End plays. The theatrical adaptation of Michael Arlen's controversial novel, The Green Hat, was a major event in the London theatre in 1925. Although the Lord Chamberlain's office forced the removal of some of the more sensational elements from the plot, the play was still considered to be very scandalous for its time, as was its star, the American actor Tallulah Bankhead. This was pre-Hollywood fame. By the way, to those of you who are tempted to seek out either the play or its novel source, I feel like I should warn you that it will seem very tame and talky to a present-day audience. It's still unclear how Hamzeh Carr became involved in this play, and no images seem to survive of the sets that he designed. The other play mentioned, The Moon and Sixpence, was an adaptation of Somerset Maugham's best-selling novel, itself a version of the life of artist Paul Gauguin. Hamzeh Carr's contribution was the decor for one scene, an interior of a Tahitian house that the artist in the play has decorated with wild murals indicating his unstable mental state. Was it a coincidence that Hamzeh Carr did this after his first season at Kuranas, copying strange murals in a house? Again, no images of Hamzeh Carr's work on this play survive, but Somerset Maugham's novel suggests what the decor might have looked like, and his descriptions are not that far off from how Maugham might have described the Kuranas house. Although Hamzeh Carr did a bit more theatrical design at different points in his career, 1925 seems to have been a high point for this. He doesn't seem to have made it a priority after that. Another very precious bit of documentation for Hamzeh Carr comes from around the same time, also from John Lane's Publicity for Light of Asia. In the internal house journal for the publisher, The Bodleian, portraits of John Lane writers and artists appeared in a promotional feature, and this included a self-portrait sketch of Hamzeh Carr. Alone among the artists, Hamzeh Carr opted for a drawing, one that may verge on a self-caricature, and a drawing with connections to another John Lane artist of an earlier generation, Aubrey Beardsley. There's a clear line, if you'll forgive a pun, between the sinuous curves of Beardsley's scandal-causing work of the 1890s and Hamzeh Carr's own self-portrait from 20-odd years later. But this line drawing also connects Hamzeh Carr to a number of other artists and traditions. Finding this little self-portrait was an extraordinary moment for me, a moment in which Hamzeh Carr, someone I'd been studying for a couple of years already, came to life. We have, as far as I can tell, no photographs of Hamzeh Carr in the Kelsey archive, and I've yet to find photographs of him from any other source. So this self-portrait is, for me at least, a very precious document in many ways. With any self-portrait, the artist is showing the viewer something that they want us to know about themselves. So I'm asking, what is Hamzeh Carr showing with this image? I've been looking at the art of Hamzeh Carr's time, as well as other popular and scholarly media, to try to decode the messages that Hamzeh Carr is giving us in this deceptively simple portrait. Although I still don't feel like I can answer who Hamzeh Carr was in detail, I am in the process of establishing some knowns about him from the evidence that I've found to date that I'll summarize in conclusion. As always, this is subject to revision in light of future finds, but for now, first and foremost, Hamzeh Carr was an artist. However else he was identified, he always identified himself, and other people always identified him as an artist, and being an artist was a significant part of his identity. It's all the more frustrating, therefore, to find so little of his work readily available in museums or otherwise. Most Hamzeh Carr work that I've seen is in published books, such as the ones that we've seen. Aside from this self-portrait, none of the portraits for which he was apparently known are readily viewable. He is also repeatedly identified as an Englishman. Later sources often identify him as Egyptian, but contemporary sources all agree he is English, and I have reason to believe that he was born in North London. Again, most mentions of Hamzeh Carr that I've found do identify him as a Muslim convert. And again, as I mentioned earlier, conversion to Islam is not uncommon in England after World War I. Hamzeh Carr can be understood in the context of this, although his own reasons for conversion are both more personal and universal. And an anecdotal account I found in Swedish, no less, suggests that Hamzeh Carr's conversion was motivated at least in part by aesthetic factors. He cites the architecture of a particular mosque in Cairo as an influence on his conversion. Hamzeh Carr's own observation in the article that I showed you that he is not an Orthodox Muslim also combined with the information from this same anecdote that suggests that he wasn't particularly observant as a Muslim. A certain amount of the information that I have about Hamzeh Carr is coming from sources in the London and Cairo Theosophical Societies with which Hamzeh Carr was actively involved. He illustrated a book for the London Society, and he was actually the head of the Cairo Society in the late 1920s. In that capacity, he brought Egyptians into an organization that had previously been dominated by expatriate Brits. And again, we see Hamzeh Carr's engaging with Arabic-speaking Egyptians. This is a theme that occurs over and over again. These are the things I think we can say we know about Hamzeh Carr. There are other things that I'm falling out, which for now I'll call possibilities. I think it's very likely that he was a soldier in World War I, and that this may have contributed to both his interest in Egypt and his conversion to Islam. He is sometimes described as a surrealist. Exactly what this means in the context of his work is not clear. There was a surrealist movement in Egypt in the 1930s and 40s. He doesn't seem to have been a formal part of it, but may have been an informal part. There were certainly surrealist groups in London as well that he may have been involved with. He is sometimes described as an occultist, and this is usually in connection with his interest in theosophy. It may be that people who are not too familiar with theosophy are confusing the two, but it is something to bear in mind. There are many occult groups in England at the time that are part of the wider circles that he's traveling in. It's also fairly clear that he was a part of various LGBTQ communities in London and Cairo. Specifically, he was involved in this big social circle in Cairo that's centered around R.G. Geyer Anderson, where most of the people in it are expatriates who are gay or bisexual men. And this seems to be a part of who Hamzeh Carr hangs out with. So this brings us back to this portrait. What is Hamzeh Carr trying to tell us here? I still don't have definitive answers, but I think this portrait, by trying to decode how he's representing himself, this will give us more clues into who Hamzeh Carr is. This certainly helps me a lot in kind of having something to focus on when thinking about Hamzeh Carr. In any case, I'm still searching for Hamzeh Carr and will continue until I find some answers. Finally, an appeal for information. If anyone does have information about Hamzeh Carr, and I'm specifically interested in new documents or unpublished documents or paintings, do let me know. Please be aware that I do know already about the books that I have shown you. I have multiple copies of them. I have lots of information, but anything else, especially if you have hints on documentary sources or unpublished work, that would be most welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Terry. At this point, we will open up the Q&A to our audience. So you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can place your question in the chat and I will read it for Terry to answer. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, I ran on rather long there, didn't I?
It looks like we have a hand up. Arthur, you can feel free to go ahead.
Thank you. I will then raise my hand, put it down. Thank you, Terry. Good to see you. Thank you. This was a fascinating talk. In asking for other sources, I'm looking at a letter from Peterson to Kelsey, April 10th, 1927, where he's talking a little bit about how Carr is going to make the paintings. Is that a letter you already know, or should I share it with you?
I don't think I have that. Yes, no, if you could share that with me. That
and what I should acknowledge the Europe project, because I had an undergraduate student transcribing a lot of these letters, so I can now search for terms in the letters, which is easier. Thank you. I will share it with you then.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. Yes.
Great. It looks like we have a question in the chat. What did Hamzeh Carr go to Egypt, or why? Why did Hamzeh Carr go to Egypt, and what was his purpose or mission when he went there?
That is a very interesting question, and I'm still trying to find out why he first went to Egypt. If my theory about his legal name is correct, and if my theory about his military service is correct, he was involved, he was a part of a unit of the British military that was stationed in North Africa. And so I think that he may have initially gone to Egypt as part of the British military. And that may be where he saw this mosque and kind of was moved by it in some way and started going to Egypt regularly. But that is still one of the big questions in my mind. So thank you.
It looks like we have a hand up from Anne. Anne, feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, you mentioned that in the production of Moon and Sixpence, it showed his home in the end in a particularly sort of bright way or elevated way. I mean, it was. Well, did I get that right?
The scene that Hamzeh Carr does the design for in The Moon and Sixpence, it's at the end of the play, where we get to see the interior of the Paul Gauguin character's house, which he has been decorating throughout the course of the play. And in the Mom novel, at least, it's described in terms of these very lurid and very hallucinogenic type paintings. And so it seems that Hamzeh Carr was specifically chosen to do decorations for that particular scene, presumably on the basis someone had seen his work before already and decided that he was the one who should do that.
I wonder if it could have been an influence on the film, because the film, I'm trying to remember if it's black and white most of the way through, but the very last scene of the film is inside his home with incredibly bright, vibrant colors. So it's a real
Right.
sort of artistic change from the earlier part of the
Right.
film.
Oh, how brilliant. I didn't know about that. I'll have to watch the film and see. Even if they're not using Hamzeh Carr's designs, it would still be really useful to see how that's handled, because I think that's part of the my understanding of the play is that the colors are relatively drab for most of it, and then in this scene you get something that kind of stands out. At least that's what the reviewers seem to comment on. None of them mention Hamzeh Carr by name, but no, I'll definitely check out the film. Thank you for that tip. That's wonderful.
Oh, we have another question. What influenced Hamzeh Carr to be an artist?
Wow, that's a good question too. And I don't know. I went into this kind of with a bunch of theories about Hamzeh Carr, some of which have been disproven, some of which have proven. One of my theories had me thinking that maybe he came from a particularly artsy family or artsy background. As far as I can tell, that doesn't seem to be true, though. So I don't know the answer to that, but that is, I think, a really good question.
We have another question. You said that Hamzeh Carr was a surrealist. Do you
Yes.
know why he was a surrealist, or what led him to be a surrealist?
He is described as a surrealist by other people. So whether he considered himself one or not is an open question. There is work of his that I've seen that's unpublished that does kind of fit with what's going on in surrealist art in the 1930s. As to why he might have gotten involved in that, I can see two possibilities. One is that there is a surrealist movement in Egypt in the later 1930s, and this may have been something that got him interested. He seems to have been actively involved in arts communities in Egypt. I think he would have been open to the Egyptian artists who were adopting the kind of classic French surrealism to express their own ideas in this art and liberty movement. That was the Egyptian surrealist movement. There's also a very active kind of tradition of surrealism in England, also in the 30s, that may have been an influence on him as well.
Oh, interesting. We have another question from Linda.
Okay.
Do you see any surrealist tendencies in the paintings he did at Karanis?
No, these are very strictly documentary, and we can judge that because we have photographs of the originals. He seems to have stuck fairly closely to the originals there. But certainly, I think you can already see potentially surreal elements, let's say, in some of the book illustration work that he did. I didn't show you things from the Theosophy book that he illustrated, but there, I think you could definitely say there are surreal elements there. So.
Okay, and her follow-up question, when there is an exhibit, do you think there will be photographs along with the paintings?
Oh, yes, yes. I'm planning on, what I'd like to do is bring in kind of paper ephemera, photographs, all kinds of things in addition to the facsimile paintings that belong to the Kelsey. I'm hoping to be able to borrow some of his work in other collections as well to bring here. So yes, there will. I'm hoping that we can really bring in a lot of illustrated material to supplement the Karanis paintings.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, will this Zoom recording be available to participants? And yes, it will be. You can check our website. The Kelsey Museum has a YouTube channel where we post all of these recordings.
I just want to thank you all for coming out on a fine Friday afternoon. It's been, as you can tell, I love talking about this. This is a really exciting project, and I'm really looking forward to what I discover next. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. This was so fascinating and so interesting. And I would just want to thank all our supporters that attended this talk today. And if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up, I think. And just let you all know, please check back on our website for our future Flash Talks and other events here at the Kelsey Museum. So thank you very much. And
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for your help. I appreciate it.
all right.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye all.